Hello, my name is Christina Neri, and I am doing my presentation today on the molecular and symptomatic differences between natural and synthetic cannabinoids, and I am doing it in a Minecraft build style. So, first things first, we have to talk about what exactly is a cannabinoid and what is it classified as. So, first things first, the most popular two plants for cannabinoids is considered THC indica and THC sativa, or the cannabis indica and cannabis sativa plants. Now, THC itself chemically stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, and it is actually present in the form of THCA, which the name I will not try and pronounce right now for the sake of not making your ears bleed. And it is actually then hydrolyzed into what we consider to be THC, which is delta 9, and we are going to go into the molecules in a little bit. So the THC contents will vary depending on where it is stemmed from the plant. So say if you want the seeds or you want the leaves or the stems, you're going to have around a 2 to 8 percentage point of THC. If it's going to be something like hemp oil or resin, which is in my hand right now, it is going to be more of a 6 to 10% chance, and the extracted oil is going to be anywhere from 18 to 60% chance. Now, hemp is something that we know that is extremely popular as well. Hemp is a plant that is in the THC family, and it is considered a cannabis plant. However, it is under regulation to have a THC content of less than 0.3% and can be made not only into hemp oils, it can also be made into paper, into clothing, into even milks. And I know, as crazy as that sounds, it is true. So if we want to look more into what each of these does, we have to go more into the molecular side of things. So we're going to pop over here really quickly, and we're going to go look at the molecules. So first things first, the molecules here is delta 9 THC, and it is our primary psychoactive compound. So for a quick key, so it makes it easier for everybody, the white blocks are hydrogen, black is carbon, red is oxygen. The clear grayish glass here are our single bonds, and the black glass panes are our double bonds. So if I fly up here, you're going to see this is a 1-to-1 recreation, obviously not to scale, of delta 9 THC, and the big two parts of the molecule we want to be looking at is this double bond here between this is the 9 carbon and the 10 carbon, and this carbon up here, which is the 11 carbon. This top half of the benzene ring as well as this carbon are going to change variably, but this delta 9 is responsible for binding to something called the CB1 receptor in your brain, and as well as the CB2 receptor. Different compounds in THC and its different variants, such as indica or sativa, as those have different somatic differences, are going to have different effects and different binding affinities. But overall, this is the basis for every single one of them. So for this one, it's relatively simple. This is kind of our backbone. This is our basis. This benzene ring right here in that plus center in the middle of my screen, and this carbon chain don't change all too much throughout the entirety of the process. This also primarily makes up about 2 to 30% of plant material, and about 30% of it is actually lost during pyrolysis. Now, to get to our psychoactive, or our metabolite, this actually needs to go through a process called decarboxylation, where this carbon 11 actually will be decarboxylated, because there is normally also a alcohol group on the top up here, and that is what will get us our compound. Now, if we go into our next section, we can kind of start to get into the meat of everything. This next one is cannabidiol, or CBD. Now, this is obviously a very popular one for a number of reasons, as well as it being the popular one when somebody wants something that has some of the more anti-anxiety inducing parts of THC, but also doesn't want the high and potentially can't even have it because of either their job or medical limitation, because we will get into these symptomatic parts at the end of this presentation. So first thing that we're going to notice is this part looks a little different. I know I did say that this benzene ring doesn't change much. Well, that was a partial lie, because now this carbon here has a hydroxy group attached to it, and this here also no longer has a methyl group. It is now a double bonded carbon, and is going what would be considered into the page if you're looking at this on a flat diagram. Same goes for one of the carbons on this one. The other one is just assumed flat because it was not specified. And same thing with this carbon here. Now, CBD in and of itself It does not have the hydroxy group or the benzene ring position in relation to the psychoactive ring, which is this ring here, which is what is going to trigger this. It is heavily unregulated, and it can be converted into delta 8 and delta 9 via the usage of acid and heat. So if someone, say, is having like a CBD gummy, there is a chance that trace amounts of that will actually turn into delta 8 and delta 9, say in your stomach, because you are in that presence of acid and heat, although it is a very energy intensive process to do it externally. So on to the next. Next, we have delta 8 THC, which is considered mostly synthetic. So I say mostly synthetic because mostly synthetic means that most of the time it is going to be man-made in a lab, but it is present in very, very small compact amounts in THC itself. And it is also what is advertised often as a less psychoactive alternative to THC. And there's a couple of differences molecularly here. So we see here, like I mentioned before, this top half of this benzene ring and this carbon are most important. Now, instead of between the 9 and the 10 carbon, we have a double bond between the 8 and the 9 carbon, as well as this carbon actually now being connected to the oxygen on this benzene ring as well. So those two changes can entirely change the psychoactivity of the drug, the binding affinity of the drug, and what it can do symptomatically to your body. And this is actually a much more popular strain for people who might not want as quote-unquote intense of a high. So moving on, this is the one where we're going to need to do a little bit of a warning / preface on what exactly we're going to be looking at here. So this next one is going to be our synthetic cannabinoid. Synthetic cannabinoids are an entire league in and of their own. And often they are the most heavily unregulated, and they also can be advertised quite often as something called K2 or spice, particularly at smoke shops. And it can also be advertised as CBD, even in drugstores, at smoke shops, even dispensaries if the dispensaries aren't heavily regulated and checked on a regular basis. So the strain we're about to look at is called MBMD4EN Pinaka, and it is entirely man-made and entirely synthetic. This was, as of 2021 third quarter, the most popular one on the market, and there's new ones coming out every single month. So we're going to be dealing with a similar key here with all the same as here before, but now we have this blue atom, which is actually a nitrogen. And if I just come over here, you will very quickly see that the molecule looks entirely different from what is considered a normal THC molecule. Not only the fact that there is now only one benzene ring, but also now there is an adjacent ring that contains two nitrogens, and this entire second section of the molecule, which looks entirely different and will lend itself to a whole slew of different semi-hazardous and even harmful adverse effects. If we go back to the lab, we can go a little bit more into that, which we can do right now. So now that we're back in the lab, let's talk a little bit about the difference symptomatically between natural and synthetic cannabinoids. So as I've stated before, natural and synthetics both bind to the CB1 and CB2 receptors in your brain and can both produce the feelings and effects of a high. However, naturals are less binding affinitive to your CB1s and CB2s compared to synthetics. Now, going into naturals first, say I have something like a joint or a brownie or something of that nature, or even one of those e-liquids that are really popular or were back a few years ago. Those can trigger feelings like euphoria, sedative-like effects, mood swings, an altered sense of time, an increase in appetite, or as people who like to get high call it, the munchies. Vasodilation, conjunctival suffusion, which is what we consider bloodshot eyes, a dry mouth and throat, just to name a few. So there are some adverse effects that can happen if you ingest quite a bit of THC. However, it is very difficult to overdose, if not impossible, if you do not have a pre-existing heart condition, which could cause cardiac arrest. And quite a few THC-related deaths do relate to that. Moving on to our synthetics, or what is more scientifically called cannabimimetics. These are going to have a very similar high and similar effect to the natural cannabinoids, but they will bind much more strongly to our CB1 receptor, and it has a higher binding affinity, meaning you have more effect with less drug, and that is not something that is always accounted for in distribution of a synthetic cannabinoid. So These can typically be sold at dispensaries or at smoke shops, like unregulated smoke shops that say they claim to sell K2 or spice or CBD oils that they claim has no THC in them, or even Delta 8 sometimes. And those compounds are typically a synthetic cannabinoid in disguise. The symptoms can be similar to a high, however, there can be a much more dangerous list of adverse effects because people tend to not know what they're getting themselves into. Some of the symptoms listed by victims were a quote unquote hard high, which, according to victim reports, is where you have a high, but then you are riding that line between what is considered a pleasant high where you are very relaxed, not very anxious, and a bad high where you're going to start feeling some of that paranoia. You're going to start feeling that dizziness, that weakness, that lethargy. And a lot of them have reported feelings of this, but they have also reported feelings of hallucinations, schizophrenic episodes, disassociation, traditional high symptoms, but also tachycardia, hypertension, episodes of paranoia. One victim even mentioned that they did not leave their house for a period of 4 days after having that, thinking that they had taken a CBD supplement. But upon confirmatory and presumptive testing, CBD was only found in some cases, less than 30%, with THC and synthetic cannabinoids being found in every single one of them. And all were advertised in some capacity to be CBD oils or gummies or treatments of some sort. The inherent danger with these is that not only can it trigger something like a psychoactive break, but it can also trigger full-on medical emergencies and people that are unaware of what they're consuming, especially with the differing trends and the ever-changing atmosphere and land that is synthetic cannabinoids, with different strains coming out every year, making it even more difficult for toxicologists to detect, to treat, and to prevent these compounds from being out there and potentially even harming more people in a foreign land that is THC regulation and legislation, especially with its associated isomers. So, thank you for joining my presentation today, and I hope you all have a good day.